Dear friends, I want to thank you all for joining me and my daughter here today, not to mourn the passing of Harold, but to enjoy and celebrate his life in the years that he had on earth. It's been an interesting, very interesting life. I'm going to have a few words, and then I have some fellows and friends in the audience who have agreed to, who have worked with Harold, both on the union level and those who have worked with him in the school, because Harold, besides being an activist, was quite a ham in his own right. A little history of Harold. Harold was born in Detroit, Michigan in 1929 to a father from Wales and a mother from Pinsk, Russia. They came here to find a better life, and his father was a worker in the Ford Rouge plant at the time when the biggest fight for a good union, for good representation, for better working conditions and living conditions there, and he struggled. So Harold had a background already of that, but Harold, even as a child, was always very interested in reading. And it wasn't just for reading for fun, which he also enjoyed, but Harold was one that loved philosophy, of politics, world events. This was his forte. His ability to use words to express himself succinctly, but in the proper way to try to improve others' lives. Shortly after Harold and I met on a picket line in West Los Angeles when his family finally left here and moved on, there was a bowling alley in West LA where blacks, Negroes, Indian, anybody of ethnic background was not allowed to enter the bowling alley. And Harold and I were very, very fortunate in our dealings as we grew up, because I also came from a family where my parents were migrant workers. My father was an organizer within the Mexican community in Denver, Colorado. So I also had a history of what it was to struggle for the rights of others. But we met on this little picket line, and Harold saw this little girl running back and forth with probably a poster that was, a placard that was probably bigger than her, but you know, I was there. And we were fortunate that we were meeting people of distinction, like Pete Seeger, who was one of the folk singers. We were also very fortunate at one point to have met Paul Robeson, who was again another great fighter for his people, but never just for his people. One of the beauties of Paul was that he also fought for everybody. But anyway, shortly after being married, Harold went to work. He first started working for the International Longshoremen and Warehousemen's Union under the leadership of a very controversial leader called Harry Bridges. If no one knows or has heard of him, I think if you look him up, I think you would find it a very interesting story. Again, controversial, but a fighter for the workers. But Harold then left and went to work for the United Auto Workers. Now Harold had the intelligence, the brilliance, the knowledge of world events and everything that Harold could have been anything he wanted to. Certainly he didn't have to be a worker, but that was where his heart was. And so he went to work instead with the UAW and worked his way in from the assembly line and worked his way with the union because he really loved what he was doing and managed to get to the point where he became president of his local. And at one time there was a wildcat strike. We have to understand that there were a lot of young people at the time who had great ideals like Harold, but really didn't realize that there's a time for everything. A wildcat strike was only going to hurt the workers as well as the company. And so he was able to finally put a stop to that and bring everybody concerned for the better of them all. At this time, Walter Reuther had sent his second in command, Leonard Woodcock, to oversee what was going on. And fortunately for them, they saw Harold, liked what he could do, liked his ability of doing this, and so they asked him to come here and become an international rep. And the rest, as you say, is history. He started there. He learned to negotiate. He learned to, most of the time he was gone because he was busy with his job. And he said to me once, he said, you know, Dorothy, because we moved back to Michigan. I didn't know anybody here, and we didn't have any real family here. And he said, I'm going to have to rely on you. And I said, so what's new? We have relied on each other for as many years as this long. I'm certainly not going to stop now. You do what you have to do. I'm there with you. And I took care of, brought the kids up. But at all times, Harold, aside from being a worker, a fighter for others, he was a loving father, certainly a loving husband. And had he been fortunate enough to have lived long enough, this November would have been our 63rd wedding anniversary. But unfortunately, as Harold was working with the union, he began to see some changes that disturbed him terribly. Because now Reuther was gone. Unfortunately, he was in an accident. And suddenly, the union was no longer going and concerning themselves with the working class and the workers that they were sent out to support. It became a question of bureaucracy and individual power. Harold tried to change that, but was unable to. And so he said to me, I can't continue in this organization. So he decided to go to school, got his BA in sociology, because this was his great love, and then got his law degree. And he figured as a lawyer, he would continue his battles for those who were being abused by the company and by the union that they were supporting. And even though he was getting he retired, even though he was getting his pension from the UAW and General Motors, he had no problem in going to court and suing them when they did the wrong thing. But, so this was his legacy to his children. Fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. Be true to each other. Trust your friends, but beware of false friends. And now, if you will bear with me, my daughter has a few words that she would love to express about her father. And I am fortunate that I have in the audience a gentleman, Mr. Brassfield, who has worked with Harold within the union and knows the struggles that he went through, for he himself was part of that struggle. And I have asked him to say a few words. The other is that a lot of people either knew Harold as the fighter, and fortunately, friends of ours who also knew Harold's other side. He had a dry sense of humor, but he used it well. I also have another fellow attorney in the audience who I would like to have him come up later and also say a few words, because he too has been touched by Harold. Thank you.